Welcome to the Catacomic Machine. My name is Matt, and this is the third of several mini-episodes that were stolen from AAR this past November in Boston. In what follows, you'll hear Philip Clayton, who spoke briefly at the New Materialism, Religion, and Planetary Thinking seminar, which was one of my favorite sessions, actually. And you'll also hear responses and questions from Karen Brayand Paul Carr, who has a really cool book with a butterfly on the front. I think I've got 2 or 3 more of these I want to share with y'all, so stay tuned for that. Okay, here's Philip Clayton.
And now I think we have Philip Clayton, right, from Claremont.
Matter values, ethics and politics for a climate in crisis. Holmes Ralston writes, "An organism is the locus of values defended. Life is otherwise unthinkable. Such organismic values are individually defended, but, ecologists insist, organisms occupy niches and are networked into biotic communities." My position is unapologetically seeking a basis and motivation for action. Ethics and politics for action. In other words, what I think I know, what I take it that we know, is that we live on a planet that we're rapidly destroying. The only fixed reality I bring into this discussion is that one. And if that weren't the topic, I wouldn't be in the room at all. I have to confess that at the beginning. And to name an insanity and to act is to have some sense of an ethical and political location. That's why new materialism, I think, is interesting. But it leads me to say that I rest lightly with the metaphysical discussions and the ontological discussions that actually gave rise to new materialism. That doesn't become the center, and I don't believe that 20 years from now people will be calling something the new materialism, right? In academics, it'll be 18 months from now that the larger room is talking about the radical materialism or the post-new materialism, something like that. Even that saint of all saints of metaphysics, Alfred North Whitehead, isn't a reason to be in this room, and I would hold him lightly. Leave the metaphor there. And so I begin with a mea culpa. I am, of all sinners, the chiefest, having spent my life in deriving beautiful metaphysical systems on behalf of God and nature and religion and science. So my paper is recognizing that standard debate, and some of my long-term colleagues in religion science are in the room, didn't offer the sort of planetary ethic that we needed. Mea culpa. There are some metaphysics that have to be destroyed. I think that old-style materialism needs to be destroyed. It was, for Hobbes, matter in motion, and it was almost by definition the denial of values altogether. Old-style materialism gave rise to old-style dualism. Actually, to be honest, it was the other way around. That is, values work only if they're transcendent of the world and not embodied. That was a stalemate. It's a stalemate that we still encounter today in the context that we live in. So the saint perhaps now becomes Saint Friedrich Nietzsche, who writes, "Body am I and soul, thus speaks the child. And why should one not speak like children? But the awakened and knowing say, body am I entirely and nothing else. And soul is only a word for something about the body. The body is a great reason, a plurality with one sense, a war and a peace, a herd and a shepherd." I come from the standard debate about emergence, emergent complexity, self-organizing systems, and have spilled much ink in that direction. Those are purely material positions. They argue for a monism of matter energy that takes more and more complex forms, including this conversation, or dreaming of world peace, or inventing Hogwarts. That can be understood materially. That's what emergent complexity as a scientific system is. But we had a flaw, those of us who defended it, and that is we really didn't give an account of where the values came from, or rather where they were embedded. They emerged, we said, spinning our hands more and more quickly, right? But we didn't really take on the question. My excitement as an activist about new materialism is the values are either there from the start or they don't exist. As John Cobb always says to me, you can't start with pure matter with nothing and suddenly find value in something like spirit. And as usual, John is right on that. The second phase of emergence was the recognition of value as located in every agent. So Stu Kaufman taught me this. If there's a single-celled organism, there's already good and bad for that organism. You move up a glucose gradient, that's good. You move toward toxin, that's bad. Value started with the first self-reproducing agent of all. And if there, then all the way up. And those are details. To close, this is the view that matter values. That's what new materialism lets us say. And if there are values, values are about suffering bodies. If the first self-reproducing agent already has value, suffers, then values are about the suffering bodies. And friends, that's where we close the circle to a planet in crisis. That is an active ethics as a ground, if I may hold that word lightly, for action. And an active ethics of values location is the core of a politics, which is not merely realpolitik, that is for one's own convenience.
I can speak for that. I would add to the issue. I think actually you've started to answer your own question in that recognizing, or at least this is what I'm trying to do, some of my work is recognizing that like we are killers is part of the beginning of responsibility. And I'm drawn to this sense of excessive responsibility in Jacques Derrida's work and in work that Donna Haraway pulls up where she says to change from the commandment thou shalt not kill to thou shalt not make killable. Because if we think we can check ourselves out of the killing, then we are not being responsible for the fact that of course you have to kill. And that like maybe we want to kill the cancer cell, right? But to not make killable is to say, you know, even in the people we may decide are deplorable, we can't cut off without saying like, I'm making a decision to cut that off. And that's the right decision, but it's not because it's a white mouse or a Republican or whatever. You can't, the excessive responsibility is in the acknowledgement that you're a killer, I think.
One more up here.
I'd like to comment on where do these values come from. It sounds a little bit ad hoc to me. As a scientist, as a materialist, just for point of argument, there are laws of science, there's laws of quantum mechanics, and all material obey that, and why not a divine power behind those laws of science? Because without that, I think just bringing in values, that's human values. And to say that a cell has values, I don't know, where's it come from?
Okay, Paul Carr, thank you. Ursula Goodenough would say a cell has a sense of self, though. Any other comment before we give it back to Philip? Okay.
Yes, we do live by killing bodies. That's a lesson I learned from Jain friends. Until Stalakina, until you no longer breathe, you are in fact killing bodies. The radicalization of that thesis is one of the great contributions of Jain understandings of ahimsa. I don't think it's possible arbitrarily to create values at some point so I don't get exhausted. Right? If I could just create them around my family, for example, I wouldn't worry about all of you in a forest when the lion is attacking. Right? But I just don't think that that's the nature of life. When I understand a single organism, I recognize that its, his, hers, location is always as value-bound as ours are. We are always already related to other bodies. That's what I get from new materialism, if one's going to hold that as a metaphysic. It's what I get from emergent complexity. And it's pragmatically helpful to address a planet whose body is suffering in the same way. And is that overwhelming? Yes, damn it, that's overwhelming. But that's the starting point, I think, for, what are we, 200 scholars costing $210,000 an hour in our sitting here together. To live is to be a unit of value. I take that, if you wish, not as a metaphysical or ontological pronouncement at all. I take it as a starting point for action. And anyone who controls the introduction of value is God. He's the one now that says what shall be taken as valuable and valuing, usually himself, and what then is in the universe of moral discourse. I just don't think we get to do that. Thank you.